Happy trade deadline to everybody. Jeff, great to see you here in person.
No, I'm just happy to be with you two, actually. It was not that happy a trade deadline per se. It was amongst the worst we've ever seen.
On the actual day, Blake, but let's remember how great this deadline season was, right? Like, let's give them, because yesterday we were fawning about just how incredible it was, all these trades, analyzing them. NHL GMs grew up here. They got bigger, bolder, braver in the last week. Jeff?
Well, I think tomorrow's deadline will be better. Oh, that's not how it works.
No.
I thought every day this week was kind of its own
true.
deadline.
2 days ago was crazy. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
So let's start with the big story here, and that is the Canucks did not move JT Miller. They did not move Brock Boeser. They did not move Connor Garland,
who was a late rumor to the mill.
Yeah. Although I think we've all known that they wanted to move off Connor Garland. The news began today from Darren Dreger, whose sourcing and reporting on this is impeccable, in my view, that the Pittsburgh Penguins had an all-draft picks offer to the Vancouver Canucks. Frank Saravelli of the Daily Faceoff said that was not good enough for Vancouver. They wanted a young center. Dreger mentioned the center component as well. Frank going further, saying a young center, 2 firsts or a first and a prospect. We had heard earlier in the week that the Vancouver Canucks called Pittsburgh to engage on JT Miller. And Pittsburgh winds up doing Nick Bonino today. Did they add a depth defenseman as well?
Kulikov,
by no means were they fishing in the Boeser Miller pool. So I think the question has to be asked, and we'll talk to Darren Dreger about this next week, Blake. Was this smokescreen from Pittsburgh, where Ron Hextall was under a lot of heat from fans and media, where there were even leaks about his coach wanting Jacob Chychrun, where the Michael Granlund deal was not particularly well liked because Granlund is on the bad contract. And my sense is that the folks in Pittsburgh might have been a little upset with the Vancouver Canucks about the leaks and the rumors about Boeser earlier in the trade season. So do you think this was Pittsburgh just going, we took our best shot at a local guy in JT Miller, couldn't make it happen because the other side wouldn't take just draft picks?
I mean, here's the thing. The Canucks purportedly wanted a center coming back. Who is that center?
Well, and Blake, all draft picks for a team that would have had to have moved money out.
Yeah.
Like, Pittsburgh wasn't going to be able to add Miller or Boeser without moving money out. So I mean, I presume there could have been trade brokerage, but even with trade brokerage, it might have been difficult to add a salary like Miller, which brings me back to, was this maybe Pittsburgh firing a shot across the bow of Alvin and Rutherford, their old management team there? Like, hey, you want to talk about us being interested in Boeser earlier in the trade deadline season? Guess what? We're going to send a poison pill back to you and talk about how there was something real and legitimate on the table for JT Miller.
I mean, it's
today.
quite possible, but a lot of the stuff just doesn't add up. I don't see a prospect at center that would blow the Canucks socks off, that would make them feel good about that trade. Like, it just doesn't jive for me. So,
Jeff, what did you make of all this Miller talk today?
If anybody would know the Pittsburgh Penguins farm system and their prospects, it would be this Canucks front office. So, smokescreen, I'm not so sure, because when I look at the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're sitting in a wild card spot right now. They have recommitted to Sidney. Well, his deal's still going on, but they re-upped with Malkin and Letang. Mm-hmm. They're not guaranteed to make the playoffs. So the idea of them going out and being bigger game hunters made some sense to me to solidify their spot as it stands right now. They're the second wild card team. But some of the teams below the bar have games in hand, and so there's going to be jockeying around the playoff bar in those 2 wildcard spots in the East. So I do think, can you imagine if you flushed a season this late in Sidney Crosby's career, no playoffs whatsoever? So I do think that the Penguins were legit, but then, now that the dust is settled, and as you mentioned, repatriating Nick Bonino and Dmitry Kulikov on his 8th team, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
As the fallback plan, because you couldn't get a Miller deal done, that doesn't make sense to me. It also doesn't make sense to me that you would be going out for a JT Miller after adding Michael Granlund. Granlund's 2 more years at $5 million per. So you were going to add JT Miller at the cost of $8 million per. So you were going to add $13 million in forwards over the next 2 years at this deadline. It just.
But what also doesn't
Ron Hextall was more of a draft and develop guy. He was the key man there in getting all those young LA Kings up and developed and ultimately to 2 Stanley Cup championships. I just don't believe that they were all that interested in JT Miller at the end of the day.
But what also doesn't make sense for me then is this notion from the Canucks perspective, if picks weren't enough, you just turned and traded draft picks for a player that clearly you like in Philip Hronek. So why wouldn't picks yesterday or even earlier today have been enough for the Vancouver Canucks with time ahead of the deadline to then turn and shop those picks and try to find that young center that you're looking for?
I don't want to hear that all day of the day long, is that they wanted a center, not a picks. Do exactly what you just did. You just performed this exercise using the picks as currency to pick up a player in an equally needed position, a right shot defenseman, maybe the rarest of commodities in the NHL. You used picks to make that happen. Why wouldn't you just turn around and do the same?
Maybe because it was just too late, Blake.
There's no urgency to get that player today.
That's fair.
You know, you can still make that deal on the draft floor or in the summer with those picks if they're 24 picks or what have you. So there's a million different ways to still make that work, and I'm not going to accept that as a reason why this didn't happen.
Jeff, Brock Boeser has some certainty now where he'll play the rest of this year, but how sad do you think that guy is today that his agent worked for the better part of 2-3 months to try and get him a new home, a change of scenery? And alas, he is still here with the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, I'm sure there is an element of sadness. I hope there's an element of relief, though, and just some clarity for the remainder of this year, because he talked about it earlier this week, that this year more than others, when his name had kind of been kicked around, this has been an ongoing process for a while. And, yeah, I mean, there's got to be some professional pride there that the teams tried to trade you, they couldn't. Your agent gets involved as a broker. He can't facilitate a move and get it across the finish line, and he knows he's tied to a contract that he hasn't met in terms of performance. So it's understandable why other teams weren't willing to take on the full freight, and the Canucks obviously weren't willing to retain. But 21 games to go for Brock Boeser. What does it look like? And then we're going to enter into, what is this, the third chapter of Boeser trade rumors when we get to the summer? Because it puts it to bed for now, but it doesn't put it to bed.
And, Jeff, if you were to tell me there would be another Canuck who would come to a deadline podium after not being traded and saying my contract sucks, Brock Boeser would have license to do that here in the next 24 to 48 hours. Tongue in cheek, of course. Blake, what did you make Boeser still a Canuck?
I think it's a tough deal to make right now. Not a lot of shine on the player, and not a lot of space around the league. Perhaps a strong finish to the season where he might get some more prominent looks on the power play and such will boost some confidence in making a deal for Brock Boeser in the summer. And, of course, news of an inflated salary cap might also help in this regard as well. You know, if we do get that news that the salary cap's going up X millions of dollars, maybe that encourages a deal like one for Brock Boeser.
All right, Connor Garland. Ricky Dhaliwal reporting earlier this morning, and we'll talk to Rick here coming up on the show, that the Canucks were trying to move Connor Garland. It's just difficult to move money in term. And here's the thing. It was difficult to move money in term today. I looked at a list of about 15 players that were on different trade boards, wondering who might move today. Jordan Greenway was the only one with 2 years left at $3 million per for the Minnesota Wild, moving to the Buffalo Sabres. It seemed like if you had money and you had term, GMs weren't going to stick handle that here on deadline day today. That was something that they were going to do earlier in the week. Connor Garland is still a Vancouver Canuck. Answering me one of our Bodog poll questions, Jeff. Garland or Boeser? If it's an either-or proposition, which one are you keeping?
I would keep Connor Garland. And for some of the reasons we just talked about with Boeser, it just feels to me like it is time for a break here and a fresh start and see if he can't regain his career. I do have some concerns just about foot speed, as so many do, in a league that's getting faster. I don't know where Brock Boeser's career goes. He made it look so easy to score goals in those first couple of years in the National Hockey League. But really, we have to look at him differently. He's not a goal scorer. He's still been relatively productive. The numbers aren't terrible, but We're used to seeing him, and I remember asking him at Whistler, is this the year you score 30? And he looked me in the eye and he said, this is the year. There was sort of some defiance in his answer, and of course, he's not going to come close. Got his 12th of the year last night against the Minnesota Wild. I think Garland has played for Rick Tocchet before in Arizona. He has responded. He's been better since Christmas than before Christmas. The underlying numbers are still pretty good, and he can play at pace. I do wonder, though, he's such a unique player, and we've seen this now for parts of 2 seasons here in Vancouver with all the spins and shooting from all the angles. I still think there are teams that aren't quite sure what Connor Garland is and how he would fit into their systems if teams were picking him up here for any sort of playoff run. So he'd be the guy. Smaller price point. Obviously, there's an extra year there, but of those two, I think I would hang on to Garland and move off Brock Boeser.
Mike in the Valley says Garland is easier to move. Hold on to Boeser to see if he gets a bump next year and where Hoggs fits when he comes up next year. Ideally, Hoggs replaces Boeser on the depth chart with a slight production bump and 1 year less contract. He's easier to move next season. You talk about Garland being hard to play with. Boeser needs some specific line mates as well. He needs a creative centerman. He's not going to be a bottom six guy for you. And you really need either a speedy and or defensive winger on the other side to sort of compensate for Brock's big weakness, the lack of foot speed.
Do you want to know something interesting on both of these players? You wouldn't be out of this universe to think both of these guys could set career highs in points this season. It's possible. Connor Garland,
League's getting more offensive. Scoring's a little easier, but
Connor Garland needs 18 points in 21 games.
That's sizable. But
so that's a very good pace for him. But again, they're going to be put into different positions to succeed. Brock Boeser needs 17 points in those 21 games. I mean, that's not too far off what his pace is right now.
I mean, that would be very good finishes for both those players, but I hear what you're saying.
They're going to flirt with it.
What you're saying.
I mean, they're going to come within a few points of those anyway. And who'd have thought that the way that we speak
Blake,
of them?
but we have seen these players go cold for
you're right.
20 game stretches. So, was it 21 games last year, Jeff,
Something
between goals for Connor Garland at one point?
But my point is more that we think of these players as having been more accomplished than they are. Ultimately, as much as we believe Brock Boeser at some point was going to be something bigger, we're talking about guys with career highs in the mid-50s. They are 50-point players. And when we think about 50-point players in the NHL, we don't think they're super special. But we're talking about 7 seasons deep here. 50-point players. I think that's what they are, even though you can tell us about injuries and why this and that has happened.
We got some nickel-dime stuff to deal with here in a second, but first, Curtis Lazar. Was a worthy gamble for this new management team in the offseason to give Lazar a 3-year deal at $1 million because you could bury the whole thing in the minors. You needed a right shot centerman. Jeff, they didn't have a single right shot centerman. And you needed penalty killers. And you thought Lazar could fill those roles. He didn't. But they salvaged this pretty well with a 4th-round pick in 2024 from New Jersey.
Sure, but I don't think for a second when they signed him, the idea of burying him in the minors, he was a 27-year-old. He was coming home, a BC boy who had pajamas, not quite the John Tavares level, but he was excited. He said all the right things last year. He was name-checking players that he had grown up and watched and fell in love with. And, he's an all-world guy. Like, he's one of those just absolute gems to deal with and always with a smile on his face and all those types of things. At the price point, 3 years wasn't prohibitive. Right shot center, as you said, coming from a good organization, terrific organization in Boston. Was supposed to bolster the penalty kill. Of course, they needed that because they were bad last year and they're bad again. It just didn't work. It didn't fit for whatever reason. And he seems like such a low-maintenance guy, but sometimes that's the case. And really got outplayed through training camp of the preseason by Nils Amon, and all of a sudden the guy signed as a center, was moved to the wing. And so to be able to get something when they realized, I think one thing that the organization did do fairly well this week with Riley Stillman, with Will Lockwood, now with Curtis Lazar, guys that they recognized weren't part of the future. They were able to part with them, but get something in return. So, a 4th rounder, it's a little bit of draft capital. And you can find the next Curtis Lazar, certainly the Curtis Lazar that they had and the way that he performed for them this season.
And they did make one right at the death there, defenseman Wyatt
Canucks
to the New York Rangers for future consideration, so that may be nothing.
Yeah, what does that even mean in today's world?
Blake, quickly on Lazar.
Yeah, I'll echo. I mean, we had zero problem with this contract when it started. It seemed like it might even be a cagey move.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of what we said was wrong with the Jay Beagle signing. You know, you can find fourth line centers anywhere. Just don't give them a lot of money and don't give them term. Now, they gave them term, but it was such a comfortable deal at $1 million, eminently storable in the AHL that it had zero risk. It didn't work out, and now they don't have to worry about it going forward.
Jeff, they today also marks the deadline for papering players to the minors, lest Abbotsford go on a big, long playoff run. You want to get NHL players down there playing. What's the update there from what the Vancouver Canucks did?
Yeah, they assigned 4 players to Abbotsford, but then quickly recalled them from Abbotsford.
Minus Ratu.
The most surprising is, Aatu Ratu has been sent back to Abbotsford, and he will stay there. But Vasily Podkolzin papered down and then brought back. Now, remember, he was sent down for the playoffs that lasted all of 2 games against Bakersfield last year. He probably thought that...
And there was a little chafing, as I recalled.
Yep, I think he bristled a little bit. But I didn't have a problem after the way the season spun out of control last year for him to play some meaningful hockey, even at the American Hockey League level. It just that it didn't last very long. But the guys that were assigned to Abbotsford, Ratu, Christian Wolanin, Noah Juleson, and Vasily Podkolzin. And then the Canucks have replaced Ratu on the NHL roster with PDG. He is back. Phil DiGiuseppe getting another look here. And we know that Rick Tocchet liked him and his straight lines and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not surprised. But, again, no Nils Höglander. So more guys come up to the National Hockey League, and Höglander remains buried in the minors.
Speaking of the minors, Nils Höglander still there. Jack Rathbone's still there. We wondered about these 2 guys, Blake, who are sort of dimming as prospects in the Vancouver Canucks organization, but looks like they're going to carry forward with both of them. No Aidan McDonough trade. You would have to think the Canucks feel comfortable that the Northeastern winger is absolutely going to sign with him once his college season is done. Jeff, I know you got to skedaddle. Before you do, answer me the Bodog poll question on JT Miller. The biggest regret on Miller, not trading him last year, this year, the contract extension, or no regrets at all with JT?
Oh, I was heavily on team trade JT Miller a year ago, and I still think that if Philip Hedl was involved, when you look at the way he's developed this year for the New York Rangers, like there's got to be a little bit of buyer's regret there.
And Jeff, what they got for Lundqvist from Dallas, a first and a third. Like, you take a look at what that trade could have been for the Canucks. 2 firsts and Hedl.
I'll go back down that road. That's the regret that if they had been able to make a deal. That deal particularly, I think I would have taken it.
Marvelous stuff. Jeffrey, thank you. I know you got some work to do with Andrew later, and we'll let you get out of here. Catch up with you again on Monday.
All right, guys. Thanks.
That's Jeff Paterson. We'll continue on here, Blake. A few other things we got to get to.
And by the way, I've got no problem with Podkolzin going back to the AHL playoffs again.
No. He was just in the AHL.
Right.
He took a backward step this year. I know we don't want to have to say that. We all like him and rooting for him, but that is the facts here.
And I think he'll bristle less because I think he fashioned himself in NHLer last year when he was sent down originally. Now he knows he's played the most of the year in Abbotsford.
That's good, yeah.
You know, like it's fine. And I do want him to finish the year in the NHL. I think that he's earned that right now.
I agree. He was good last night. He was very good. He was out protecting. He was out in the late stages last night.
No, and hey, Kravtsov has looked good too. But no, I've got no problem with him extending his. And also, again, KHL, shorter season, all that stuff, extending the durability of these guys right now, it's a good time to do it.
Well, and Blake, a lot of young players need to learn. The NHL is not a finish line. It's a starting block.
Yep.
It's harder to stay than it is to get there. So, no, I got zero problem with that. Also had zero problem with Bruce Boudreau on Trade Center. Wasn't that fun? There was a Bruce There It Is spoof if you missed it. There was a pep talk from Bruce.
A slap shot look back.
A slap shot. Yeah. What would they have done without Bruce?
But honest to God,
on TSN?
No, because it became a time filler this year more than any other year we've ever seen. And hey, you're going to try something to distract, and the comedy is 50-50 at best. But Bruce was good. Bruce was really good.
And as was our buddy O-Dog, who is getting better and better, I think.
Yeah, and he's good at making fun of himself, and he's a very good actor. Boy, he played the role very well.
Of GM pretty well.
Yeah.
He played the role of Bill Daly pretty well when they went through their mock draft lottery. And if you missed that part, the Vancouver Canucks moved up to number 2 in the draft lottery. Let's get to thank you very much here for a second, Blake. Chicago loses last night in Dallas. Montreal loses against the Kings. St. Louis, San Jose, someone was getting points there. It turns out being the Blues 6-3 over the Sharks. So Vancouver sitting there still with a 7.5% chance of landing the first overall pick, and Connor Bedard, 7.9% chance of picking second, which is where TSN had them, with Adam Fantilli, the big centerman from the University of Michigan, being the consensus number 2. They are most likely to pick seventh at 41%, a 34% chance of sixth, and a 9% chance of eighth. Yes.
One other thing we need to get to, and we're going to get into this with Rick Dollywall shortly, is that Aiden McDonough wasn't traded.
Yeah, as I mentioned, they better have a rock-solid verbal commitment here.
Yeah, I mean, it's sounding better and better. There's some groundwork that has been laid. And, you know, the fact that he doesn't get moved and other guys in similar situations did get moved because their teams weren't confident in their ability to sign him. I think that you can bet on seeing the whites of Aiden McDonough's eyes in a Vancouver Canucks uniform before the season ends, and certainly in training camp next season. If I'm a betting man right now, I'm saying that Aiden McDonough is, after all is said and done, a Vancouver Canuck.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right.